welcome to the next installment of the Train Vicar. Today I'm on Te Huia train. Here's the locomotive. A train that goes between Auckland and Hamilton. This train has quite a bit of history. It was initiated by the Labour government in 2020 after quite some preparation, and it's been politically contentious ever since.
Well, I got that wrong. It was supposed to start in 2020, but didn't start until April 2021 due to the coronavirus pandemic. So why was it, or is it so contentious? Well, there are a few issues with the train. First of all, quite a bit of money had to be invested early on to build new stations and to bring the rolling stock up to specification. Rolling stock is actually fairly old. The locomotives are DF class locomotives, which were first introduced in 1979 and have been refurbished and improved over time since then, but of course they're old by now. The carriages are former British rail carriages, which were built also in the 1970s in the United Kingdom and were brought over here to New Zealand in the late 1990s and refurbished in the 2000s. They ran on the Auckland metropolitan or suburban network and then were out of service for some time. And then they have now been refurbished for use on the Te Huia train. All that cost quite a bit of money. In addition, there are funds required to keep the service operating because it's not a profit-making service. What's even more contentious is that the money comes out of the transport fund, and most of the money that goes into that transport fund is actually paid by road users. Now, motorists are actually quite heavily subsidized by central and local governments, but that's another issue. The money for Te Huia train came out of this transport fund pot. The Te Huia train was further contentious because once it started running, it didn't have so many passengers, and then it stopped running after a further lockdown. And once it began, it had even less. So it probably started off with about 150 passengers train on two return services. Uh, then after lockdown, that it decreased to less 100 passengers per day on two return services but by now it's actually increased to around 250 or so passengers per day per two return services. So that's about just over 60 passengers per train on average. In addition to that, for some time, the union representing the train drivers did not allow driving trailers to be used. So there was a locomotive on either end of the train. That, of course, requires quite a lot more diesel. By now, the drivers are fine to use the driver and trailer, so it requires a lot less energy and is a lot more energy efficient to run a Te Huia train. And from a carbon perspective, of course, it's a lot better as well. While early on there were some distractors saying, well, it still isn't really a carbon reduction overall for the passengers that are traveling on the train. There were also arguments that it was a waste of money, this train. And once a politician starts down that road, they often have to go down that road and declare that it's a waste of money with continuous updates, even though the figures have changed and the waste of money is not that big anymore. And most of it is by now a sunk investment. But because once the criticism started, it seems to continue. So as you can see, this train is highly political, and transport decisions are often highly political. That's somewhat unfortunate, but to a certain degree inevitable, particularly in a country like New Zealand, where trains are not that common. In other countries, it wouldn't have been quite that political, I would think. Of course, many would just want to have a nice train. It's obvious that you between cities like that you would want to have a train. That's what you would expect in a first world economy, actually in any decent economy. So, what's all the politics about? Now, I'll try to link that to the Christian faith as well, because it seems by living a Christian life and by working for justice and so on, at some point we run into politics. No, doesn't matter whether we want to or not. Politics is always there because there are disagreements and sometimes a challenge to the current way of life. Because Christians are a sign that life can be lived differently here on earth, and that there are different priorities from what many other people think they may be. They sometimes get attacked, and it gets very heated and political. That's just part of the territory. In the face of this opposition, we need to be discerning because sometimes uh, it's just the general opposition to a Christian way of life and the Christian message. Sometimes there are quite evil forces opposing the Christian message and life of hope. And sometimes the church is doing something wrong and it needs to see where it has done something wrong. It's not always easy to see the difference, so we need to pray for discernment in times of opposition. The Te Huia train is quite comfortable actually. It's a great way to get between cities. You can relax, you can drink a bit, and people can even work, or in my case, read a book, an important book, Dogmatics by Karl Barth. And at the same time, I can look at the great countryside outside the Waikato countryside, which is quite pleasant. So this train has everything going for it, I would say.